Welcome to the Retirement Roadmap by SHP Financial, a podcast empowering today's retirees and pre-retirees to make well-informed financial decisions that will help you spend more time living and dreaming than worrying and wondering. Join me, Matthew Peck, along with my co-hosts, Derek Gregoire and Keith Ellis, as we share actionable financial strategies and insights, as well as interview top thought leaders in the world of finance, accounting, and estate planning. This is all aimed at preparing you for the retirement you've always dreamed of. Our high-quality holistic planning process has helped thousands of families retire and create what we like to call the ripple effect. The Retirement Roadmap is your guide to financial freedom. Are you ready to get started? Let's go. Well, welcome everyone to another edition of the SHP Retirement Roadmap podcast. I'll be your host today, Matthew Peck, and I'm joined by our old friend, Mark Kenney. So for any listeners who have missed some of our early episodes, Mark has been with SHP now for close to 6 years, or since 2017, and we're very, very happy to have him on. And it's one of those things that we're very proud of the team that we have here, and making sure that everyone has a chance to really contribute to the podcast, because we're a team when we deal with our planning for our clients, but we're also a team when it comes to producing content and talking about good information that we hope that you're going to enjoy and obviously to take some value out of. Mark is a CFP, or Certified Financial Planner. I'm also a fellow CFP. Have to certainly toss that in as well. We have all the tattoos. It's a weird cult thing. Like once you learn it, then it's okay. But then also a CTS, a Certified Tax Specialist as well. And so today we're going to be diving into 529s. You may or may not notice the time of year that it is, and so we'll kind of let that little Easter egg be out there so you can figure out why we're doing it in and around late May here. But the whole idea is to dive into 529s. What are the basics of it? What have been some of the updates that have happened to 529s? And then also just kick around the bigger question of how important is it to go to college? I mean, the tuition costs have continued to grow year after year after year. Obviously, student loans are always in the news about forgiveness and do we write them off, not write them off, and everything that happens during the current administration. So 529s themselves are I wouldn't necessarily say a hot topic, but something that everyone truly needs to understand what the updates are, and then just to can really discuss the importance or what is the modern value of a degree, and is it worth it or not? Because I'm sure Mark, I'm sure you're getting plenty of client questions about that.
Yeah, especially with the cost of college rising and it being so prevalent in the news of how to pay for college. We thought this was a great time to look at one of the vehicles that you can utilize to help offset those costs. So let's first get into what is a 529. A 529 is essentially a tax advantage savings account earmarked for mostly college education expenses, although you'll see they've kind of opened it up to other educational expenses besides college. So what it does is a participant will open an account for a beneficiary. So in most cases, a parent will open the account for the benefit of their child, right? So I have one, I opened it for my son. I'm the owner of the account, which is important, and he is the beneficiary. The owner controls the account, controls the investments in the account, but anyone can put money into it. And why that's important is we all know kids may get checks from aunts, grandparents, cousins. Those payments can go into a 529 as well. So anyone can add money to it, and it's for the beneficiary for the child's college education expenses. That money is invested. A lot of times these 529s will have target dated funds. So much like a retirement account may target when you're 65, a college account may target when you're 18, because that's most likely when the funds will be utilized. So you can invest this money according to the age of the child, let it grow. And one of the huge tax advantages is that when the money is withdrawn for a qualified expense, it is not taxable to the beneficiary, to the student.
But let's go back to the contributions now too. So so if it grows tax-free, it's almost like, let's walk through the mechanics of it too. So you talk about how you opened one up and that was for Jack, right?
That was for Jack, my son Jack.
Nice. All right. So we're not planning on a big soccer scholarship. Yeah. Is there anything in the plan? Okay.
But let's plan for the worst.
Right. Yeah. Because you never know. It's a tough gig out there. All right. So whether it's you as the owner or aunt, uncle, grandparents, etc., is the owner able to write off anything that goes in? Are there income limits, or just let's talk about money going in the first place?
Great question. So it's kind of almost like a Roth IRA in that the contributions that you or any family members make is not tax deductible. Okay, so you cannot offset that. The tax advantages for a 529 are that the funds grow what we call tax deferred. So if you buy, fund X for $1,000 and it's worth, $3,000 the next year, there are no taxes owed, okay? And then most importantly, when the funds are withdrawn, so when they're taken out, again, usually at 18, 19, although it doesn't have to be, all the gains, just like a Roth IRA, are tax-free if they're used for what they call a qualified expense. Now, I will make a note that some states offer small state tax benefits if you use the state-specific plan. Now, every state has a plan that they incorporate with a provider. In Massachusetts happens to be Fidelity, and you get a very small, and I say very small, a state tax deduction if you use the Fidelity plan. And some of the common misconceptions is that, well, if I open up a Massachusetts plan, my child has to go to school in Massachusetts. That's not true. They can go to any college, any third-level education, but there is a small state tax incentive. But that's really the only tax deduction you get now. Again, Matt, kind of like a Roth IRA, the funds grow tax deferred. They're taken out tax-free later on.
So let me kind of also split up a little bit to talk about when you first approach them. So obviously as an advisor, primarily your clients are 60, 65 and above. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. So then walk me through how, but then you're also a parent. So, how often does this come up a lot during your conversations with clients about 529s? Because I also know that there's something called the Super Max where people can sort of forward a lot of their gifts into it. Yeah. So almost take it through like, okay, here's a 529 from a grandparent's perspective versus here's a 529 from a parent perspective.
Great. Yeah. So this is how we utilize it for someone who has grandchildren, right? And they want to gift them money. Okay, but they don't just want to give them money so that they can go waste it and buy a car. So grandparents want to have some control over how the funds will be utilized. So in that case, what a great scenario is, the grandparent opens the 529 account. Therefore, they are the owner. They name the beneficiary their grandchild, and they can fund it. And as Matt was alluding to, one of the benefits of 529 is you are allowed 5 years worth of gifting. Okay, so remember, you're allowed to gift a certain amount of money. I think it's what, 17,000
yeah,
this year.
17,000.
17,000 is what you're allowed to gift to every individual every year without it being taxed, without any tax implications. But with a 529, you're allowed to do 5 years worth of gifting in 1 year. So if you want to reduce your estate, right, and you want to gift your grandchild money and you don't want it to be taxable, you can basically put in 5 years worth of contributions into that 529, not have it taxed, not have the beneficiary, the student, taxed on it, have it grow, and then again, they can take it out tax-free. And you control the how the funds are invested, and quite frankly, one of the benefits of being the owner is that you can actually change who the account is for if there's another grandchild. So one question we get is, well, what if my grandchild doesn't go to college? And you can actually change who the account's for, changing it to another grandchild or another immediate family member without tax consequences.
Which is amazing. And so think about that for a second, folks. I mean, let's just say, because we talked about $17,000. So now let's say the grandma and a grandpa, right, and they both have $17,000. Now we're talking $34,000. So So if you do $34,000 times 5, I mean, that's, basically what,
$170,000.
Yeah, $170,000 that you can now eliminate or get out of your estate. So it lowers your particular estate taxes while at the same time seeding the college education fund for a grandson or granddaughter. And now if you have multiple grandsons or granddaughters, now it becomes a massive amount of gifting that can happen that can, again, lower your estate tax. And certainly in Massachusetts, I know there's legislation going back and forth about potentially increasing it, but still, Massachusetts is, we're lurching back towards, or, I should say, not even lurching, heading back towards our old moniker of Taxachusetts, especially with the millionaires tax that's out there nowadays. So taking advantage of something like this, I kind of, I call it supermax or overfunding of 529 is a great technique if you are obviously in that position to be able to gift that much.
Yeah. And a lot of these 529s, they have huge contribution amounts. I think it's close to $300,000, $400,000 a year able to put into a 529. So you don't have to worry about putting too much money in there. And then again, being the owner of the 529, you can change who the account is for later on down the road if that child doesn't use it for all of their college expenses.
And we're definitely gonna dive into what happens if a person doesn't go, or if a beneficiary does not go to college, what happens then. But let me just go back really quick so I can clarify as well. So Mark, let's just say it's a grandparent, they're the owner, but then they pass away. Let's say let's say it's your dad, and then your dad passes away. Then you become the owner. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. So great question. Usually, and I encourage everyone, especially grandparents, when they open a 529, they are what you call the custodian. You can name, just like a trust, a successor custodian or a successor trustee that will come in and manage that account for that child. So you can do that, and I would encourage do that. And most of the times, you will name the parent of their, so that the account stays with the child instead of having to go through the probate system, which you probably would if there was no successor custodian on the account.
Okay. All right. So literally, when you set up the account, you're obviously setting up the beneficiary, who the account is for, and then also if you're the owner, you want to have a successor owner. Usually if it's a grandma, grandpa, they'll name each other, of course, but then you might want to name the parent of the beneficiary next. So as you mentioned, Mark, just to avoid probate, certainly just with if you can avoid probate with a piece of paper, it's
for efficiency purposes, it's just writing an extra name and an extra social security number on a piece of mind.
Right, exactly. So, okay, I have one more question on the 529, sort of like the mechanics of it, and only because I get it a lot, and I honestly, frankly, I'm not too clear on it because I think I understood it once, and then I lost it, and then I got it, and then I lost it again. What's the impact of student loans? Ooh, do you know that?
Well, when you're saying student loans, I think you're most likely talking about student aid. Okay.
Yeah, or in other words, yeah. So the beneficiary applies. Let's say it's Jack. Jack's the beneficiary. Now he has a 529 in his name. Yeah. And I've heard that there's differences between if the parent is the owner versus the grandparent being the owner, and the impact on FAFSA and Pell Grants and whatnot.
Yeah. Again, I go back to misconceptions. I have some people say, well, I don't want to open a 529 because the money in there will be less likely that my child gets financial aid. And that is not true, okay? When you go to apply for the FAFSA, they will ask about money in the child's name and assets that are in your name. And there is a formula that is utilized. And believe it or not, assets that are in the child's name, so you have a UTMA, which is a minor account, or the child has a savings account, those assets are weighted more heavily towards not getting financial aid than a 529. A 529 is asked about, and it does come into the formula, but at a fraction of the weighting towards financial aid. So it doesn't make it that the child would not receive financial aid in that case. And believe it or not, Matt hit it on it, even less so when it's the grandparent who's the owner. So if the grandparent owns the 529, it's really not counted at all because they have nothing to do with the dependency of the child. And if the parent does own it, it's weighted at a very small percentage. It used to be like 5%. I think it's even less that in the weighting formula. And so it's not a reason to not fund a 529 because it has a small weighting.
All right, excellent. So now before we get back to the 529s, I just want to point out really quickly how you're dealing with a finance geek when he just randomly drops UTMA on you. So what UTMA is, a Uniform Transfer to Minors Act, but we live in a land of acronyms, and we're talking about FAFSA and all that other world of stuff. But yeah, when Mark drops a UTMA on you, that's what that stands for, is a Unified Transfer to Minors Act, or like another way of gifting, which is a whole other podcast to itself about other ways of sort of setting up a grandson or a dependent or a granddaughter, whatever that may be, or a son or a daughter for that matter as well. But there's a whole other world of UTMAs and uniform minor gifts. There's a UMGA as well, and they're all slightly different. But
we'll save that for another podcast.
We'll save that for another podcast, absolutely. But it's what I always get a kick out of when guys and gals like us just drop acronyms like, oh, they must know what we're talking about.
Yeah, there's a lot of I apologize. There is a lot of acronyms in finance. But yes, instead of a savings account in the child's name, where it's more taxed and again more heavily weighted, a 529 gives you a little more tax efficiency and a little less weighting on the FAFSA formula.
Which is, again, I love that explanation, especially on the 529 specifically, because that was always a big question that we have. And now let's get to the biggest question, which is, what if my son, daughter, grandson, granddaughter does not go to college?
Yeah.
What then?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, I want to say, what is a qualified expense, right? So a lot of people think that, okay, this money can only be used if my son Johnny goes to Stanford, and that's just not true. It really opens up for any third level education. So that could be a training school, a beauty school, any school that's post-high school, or any further education beyond that. And it's not just tuition. It can be tuition, books, room and board, computers, fees, health insurance. So there's a wide gambit of expenses that are qualified. Now, recent legislation has even opened up more, that now up to $10,000 of the 529 can be used for private high school. Okay, so if you're putting a 529 and there's money in there, you can now use it for a private high school up to $10,000 a year. And moreover, you can use $10,000 of it per year to utilize for student loan payments. Okay. So again, what they're trying to do is encourage you to utilize 529s as this tax advantage vehicle, opening up the number of qualified expenses that you can utilize the money for. But let's play devil's advocate, and like Matt said, and say, let's say they don't want to go to school, or they don't want to do any sort of third level education. Maybe they want to open up their own business or backpack Europe. That is not a qualified expense.
Jack becomes, he becomes the world's greatest soccer player ever. You got Messi, Ronaldo, then you got Jack Kenney. Yeah, exactly.
I hope it becomes that. If that happens, so there's a couple of things that you can do. One, again, as the owner of the account, so me as the parent, okay, of that account, I would change the beneficiary to my daughter, Saoirse, right? So I can do that as the owner. Let's say my son doesn't go to college. I can then change who the account is for and name my daughter. Maybe she's more likely to do that. So one thing is changing who the account is for. The IRS lets you change it to any immediate family member. So maybe you hold on to the account and you give it to a grandchild if your children have children, or maybe you give it to a niece or nephew. You can do that, okay? Two other things that you can do. Any money that is withdrawn from a 529 that is not used for qualified expenses, okay? So again, if they wanted to buy a car, the contributions, the money that you put in there all those years, that will come out without taxation, okay? That's because, remember, you didn't take a tax deduction when you put that money in. So your contributions come out tax-free. The gains attributed to those contributions will be taxed and penalized at 10% because you didn't use them for a qualified education. But wait, there's one more rule that just came into effect under the Secure Act 2.0 that now will allow you to roll a certain amount of that 529 to a Roth IRA in the child's name. So the rule states that if you've had this account for 15 years, okay, and the child doesn't use it for college expenses, that the child can open up a Roth IRA And based on their earnings and the contribution limits of that year, up to $35,000 of that 529 can be rolled over year by year by the contribution limits into a Roth IRA to give it even more tax advantaged. So again, I bring it back to, yes, there may be a situation where if they want to, buy a house or buy a car, where there could be tax implications, but they're really opening a lot of avenues for you to avoid that into, put it into a Roth IRA or change the beneficiary of that account.
Okay, so let me just pick that up because I do really want to hit the Secure Act 2.0 and that change of that $35,000. I mean, because that was, I didn't even know that was working through the system, and then I saw that report, or then it passed by law, and it's like, that sort of changes the landscape in a very positive way.
Huge.
Because now, talk about a safety valve or an outlet. I mean, I couldn't think of a better outlet, because here we are, and not to digress too much, but a lot of people can't contribute. It's a good problem to have, but they might not necessarily be able to contribute to a Roth IRA if their income is over a certain amount of a certain level. So here's a situation where there's a certain amount going for college education, and then could also be converted into Roth. Is just such a powerful change and upgrade and an improvement on the 529 system. So it's a win-win to a certain extent outside of the sort of worst case scenario. I mean, it's not a bad, we all think of worse, financially, tax-wise, about having to pay taxes on the gain and then a 10% excise. So it's like tax plus a penalty is sort of how that works. But let's also just, I want to jump back to just the portability one last time. So if you can change the beneficiary, can the owner become the beneficiary?
Yes.
So let's just say Jack again, and let's say Circe is all set too. She's also got a soccer scholarship. Hey, why not? And now it's like, well, I want to, maybe Mark, you want to go get an MBA, or you want to get a doctorate in, being awesome or whatever it may be. It's also, I'm not sure what colleges offer that, but the point being is that can the owner become the beneficiary?
Yes. Actually, honestly, when I first opened up my 529, I was the owner and I was the beneficiary. I was going to have a child, didn't know their name, didn't know their sex. So I opened up in my name with me, the beneficiary. And yes, again, the privilege of the rights of the owner is that you can change who that beneficiary is. So in that scenario where my son and daughter don't utilize it and I want to go back and get another degree, I can change who the beneficiary is, take the funds out of that 529 and use that against a qualified expense. Again, might be a certificate program, but that is one of the features of being an owner.
Which is fantastic too. Maybe I'm a little, sort of just maybe a little bit highbrow, but the whole idea is the fact that it's going towards education. Education and eventually tax-free, potentially the Roth. As I said, I can't speak enough about that. But also, I just love what you highlighted. It's not just college, because we're going to really get into or just talk about the idea of just the value of college, which has certainly changed. And it's funny, I was talking about it last weekend with my in-laws and whatnot, but just the idea that when you make, whether you're super funding or super maxing out a gift, or whether you're doing it for yourself or for your own kids or whatever that may be, I couldn't think of a more noble goal than education, and the fact that, again, it's be trade schools and beauty schools, and this isn't just getting some philosophy major that you might not be able to really utilize in your lifetime, or something that's actually practical. The fact that you can use it in all those other areas, and then worst case scenario, or not worst, whatever, the fact that it can be rolled into a Roth IRA for said beneficiary is just such a powerful tool. So something that I'm just really enjoyed talking about, and making sure all of our listeners have a chance to really understand how powerful of a tool it is in your toolbox. But now, okay, so we talked about it a little bit off air, and then Mark, you kind of had some information here we want to share. So then the biggest question is, okay, how valuable is a degree nowadays? In 2023 and beyond, how valuable is a degree? Because certainly I wouldn't say once a week, but very, very often clients would come to me and be like, well, how about if I buy that client, my son or daughter, a home, or help buy them a home and get them started there on their mortgage, or so they don't have a mortgage, and now they have real estate, or they have equity in real estate, or they do a NUTMA, or they just say, okay, hey, let me just set something up for them that they can use whatever may be, as compared to just sort of allocating it towards education. And what did your research show about the sort of the value of a degree in the modern era?
Yeah. So, first off, the expense is tremendous, right? So
It's
I
unbelievable.
went down this rabbit hole. My son is 7, and so I went down this rabbit hole, like what will a college cost in 11 years, right? And so the cost right now is roughly like $40,000. That's like the median cost of tuition and room and board at a like normal school. Obviously, there's some outliers. There's $70,000 universities in California and BU and BC. And so how do we come up with this cost, and is it worth the investment? And so I looked at the average annual earnings or the average weekly earnings of someone. And I know there's outliers there, and I know some people say, well, what if someone, does a trade or does something? But statistics can be skewed, but they don't lie outright. So right now, the average weekly earnings for someone with a bachelor's degree is about $1,300 a week. Okay, so that, $65,000, $67,000, okay? And someone with a high school diploma is at $781. So quickly did the math, and the average earnings, so you more likely to make about $28,000 more a year with just a bachelor's degree. So if we're looking at, okay, if you're going to earn that $28,000 more, college education basically pays for itself in 4 years as an investment school. And obviously those statistics go up even more so. Someone for a master's makes $1,500 a week, a professional degree, about $1,900 a week, and a doctoral degree at $1,900 as well. And I think another huge point is the unemployment rate tied to the higher your education level goes. So these statistics, which is run by the Department of Labor, right? I got this right off the Department of Labor website, is that someone with only a high school diploma has an unemployment rate of around 9%. So 1 out of 11 people are unemployed, where a bachelor's degree is about 5.5%, and it goes as high as a doctoral degree, it's about 2.5%. So your unemployment rate or potential of being unemployed significantly goes down with a college education through the statistics through the Department of Labor.
So at the same time, if we are looking at like a 4-year payoff, and of course, not every major or not every degree is created the same. As I was sort of, and I apologize for any philosophy majors out there.
Yeah.
If anyone's listening, like, what? I was a philosophy major and I'm successful. Gosh darn it. But you get the idea where I'm assuming engineering, and I'll be very curious to find out what the research shows about an engineering degree or a finance degree or other degrees and what the impact is. But it does show, as I mentioned, even on a basic bachelor's degree, that you are saying that it does pay off in about 4 years. And also, interestingly enough, it just to kind of broaden the conversation, and I'm curious what you say to your clients, but very often, I was actually just emailing with a client just now or prior to recording, and she has one child. The husband and wife has one kid, and they want to help him out. He's in college right now. He's just a freshman. He was at Merrimack, and they're constantly going back and forth between like, I really want to help him out, but I'd be cutting back on my 401ks, and I'd be cutting back on my own contributions in order to make the tuition payments. Now, what I say to them, again, I'm very curious what your opinion is, or how you guide people and you advise people between that. I'm generally saying, look, retirement comes first. In the sense that I would love for, her son to have a full, not leave with any student loans or whatever that may be. But at the end of the day, he'll have his entire working career to pay off those loans, to pay off that tuition, no matter how expensive it may have been at that time. Where for the mom and the dad, they only have so many years of working and saving before they're retired, and so there's not many loans for retirement, right? It's pretty much what your savings is at that stage. And so, how often does that come up with you? And then how are you advising people when that dilemma arises?
I love that question, Matt, and I have an analogy that I utilize to drive this home. And so you're in an airplane, right? And the pressure cabin goes, right? And I don't know if you guys know, who do they tell you to put on the oxygen mask first? Is it your child or you? They usually tell you to put on your oxygen mask first, and that is because you can't help someone else if you're not alive, right? Or if you're not. So I use that same analogy for should I be putting money into a 529 or a 401k, and that's because you should be putting money in a 401k first, right? Because that money, you could be able to take that money out in future years to help offset or pay back your child's education, but certainly don't sacrifice your 401k, your retirement savings, to put money into a 529. 529 is a great account, a huge tax advantage, but it should be coming after the 401k, in my opinion. And again, there are. Who knows? Maybe they do get a scholarship. Maybe they do get financial aid, right? You don't get scholarships or financial aids or grants for your retirement, right? You get Social Security, but you've been paying into that. So there's no handouts when it comes to that. And I use that analogy because, again, you got to help yourself first before you're in a position to help others. And definitely do the 401k first.
Excellent. Okay, so you get the idea, ladies and gentlemen, about how 529s themselves are an amazing tool, and that has been upgraded through time. I mean, especially with that $35,000 outlet for a Roth. I mean, what was it? 15 years it has to be. Yeah. So. Yep. 15 years it has to be in place. So, I mean, it's not, obviously not doing it immediately. But also on that last topic that we just said, I mean, everyone's situation is different. So it's like if you're a parent with, young children, okay, you have to take a look at 529s from a specific angle. And, okay, you got to make sure, again, you're not sacrificing your 401k in order to fund it. But in a perfect world, you do a little bit of both. But also, I should say, it's a tool like any other. It's a tool in your toolbox to use, to be aware of, to know how it utilizes, and it's just an option. Sometimes I also talk, Mark, about how it's almost like like a deck of cards where, all right, fill up one stack first, i.e. your 401ks in your retirement, and if you're still saving, all right, let's take a look at 529s and take a look at what your college education plans are, because that's going to be a bill that you're going to need to address in some way, shape, or form. When your child is 18, if they're on that trajectory, right? And then on the flip side, now we're talking about grandparents, right? And similar idea. I wouldn't tell people to not go out or take that trip to Alaska because they really want to, fund, college education for their grandson or granddaughter. But at the same time, it's awareness. It's being aware of, what the new rules are, what qualified, expenses are, what, how often you can change beneficiaries and how portable it is, how you can move it around even back to yourself as we were talking about. So it's just understanding all the different tools in the toolbox so that you can achieve your goals. And it's all about planning. I mean, as you notice, obviously, Mark, we didn't talk once about stock market this and market that and whatever it is. I mean, by having a good financial advisor that understands all the different tools, that understands how they all work together and all the new rules that are there. That's why I always kick around about people that do it themselves. I mean, God bless you if you're doing yourself financial planning, but clearly rules change very often. And if you're not necessarily an expert in all these different areas, you might be missing out on opportunities. Okay, so at the end of the day, this is the type of planning that SHP does, that Mark does on behalf of all of his clients, and everyone here at the team is just making sure our clients themselves are making the most well-informed decisions possible. And whether it's about 529s or about the market or about income, you get the idea that whatever it may be, it's going to be deeply researched, and we're going to sort of lay it out to you with all the different options, pros and cons, and whether or not it's a good fit. So thank you again, Mark, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
I'll say you're a recurring guest now, now. You know what I mean?
I love this topic. Like I said, I think if there's any takeaways, just know there's a lot of flexibility around the 529, a lot of ways you can utilize it. And we're here to answer any questions you may have around the 529 and how it fits into your overall plan. And that's right. This is just a piece of your plan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so Mark will certainly be coming back. I'm not sure how often. We're kind of in between here and there, but just as I said, trying to provide great content, great listening. And again, Mark, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for listening. And stay tuned to the next episode of the SHP Retirement Roadmap. Thanks for listening to the Retirement Roadmap podcast by SHP Financial. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to hit the subscribe button so future episodes are automatically downloaded directly to your device. And if you've liked what you heard, please share the show. Create your own little ripples so we can help even more people with their retirement goals. If you want access to all past interviews, including notes, resources, and exclusive content from SHP Financial, visit shpfinancial.com/podcast. Thanks again for joining us on the Retirement Roadmap podcast. And for all the attorneys out there, disclaimers and disclosures, I'm just going to put on my super serious voice and add our own. No statements made during the Retirement Roadmap podcast shall constitute tax, legal, or accounting advice. You should consult your own legal or tax professional on any such matters. Information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk, and unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Our investment advisory services are offered through SHP Wealth Management LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Insurance sales are offered through SHP Financial LLC. Our advisors and insurance reps may offer clients advice and/or products from each entity. No client is under any obligation to purchase any insurance product.